Hello everybody, John here, and today on To The Garage we're finally getting on with lowering the suspension on Purdey the XK8, changing the dampers and changing the strut mounts. Now I think this is quite doable in a day, certainly the front suspension, but I've consulted with my furry buddy and Gracie says, nah, this is going to take a couple of days because of walkies, playtime and tickles. So yeah, probably defer to Gracie. This is going to be spread over a couple of episodes. Okay, so all you've missed, guys, is me jacking the car up, taking the wheels off, and I've applied a little bit of penetrant to some of the nuts and bolts. So if you're interested in the why am I changing the dampers, springs and the shock mounts, then I'll refer you back to previous videos, but in essence I fancy seeing what the car looks like a little lower. So I've got Adamesh lowering springs. The dampers seem to perform fine, but they look disgusting. The bushes are pretty much shot in them, so I'd need to change those anyway. And they are 25 plus years old. And the shock mounts, there's no way you do this job without changing the shock mounts. It's just false economy. They are also well known for collapsing and changing the ride height. So the last thing you want to do is put lowering springs on with collapsed top bushes, because you're going to end up with a very low car indeed. If your car has dropped, it's probably the cushion above the spring, more likely than anything else. The prescribed way of getting these out, the spring damper strut assembly, is to remove the top wishbone, or as a minimum to break the ball joint connection to give you more space. And I've often looked at it and actually wondered, is that necessary? So just for the hell of it, I'm going to try doing the absolute minimum, and obviously if I need to do more, I'll do more. I've also left the wheel arch liner in, again, purely out of interest. We'll see how we get on. So all I need to do is undo the anti-roll bar link, or drop link as it's called, this little rod, very often a cause of knocks and bumps in your suspension. Bolt there, get that off just to be out of the way, and also try and undo the bottom damper mounting, and we'll move on from there. That's a 17mm. And that is turning the entire system, not just a nut. So what we'll be doing is putting on a spanner. I said 17, it's a 19. Putting a spanner on, and there is a hexagonal drive in the end, which I will use to hold it still. So that is 5mm hex. Anybody who's following along at home. My drop link actually looks a little scabby, but the joint doesn't feel bad at all. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side, just because that will allow this to go out of the way. Okay, so with both sides of the anti-roll bar undone, that can be swung wherever you fancy, just keep it out of the way. Next we're going to see if we can undo the damper bolt. as a 19mm socket, my impact gun. Certainly loosening the flakes off the suspension castings. Let's get a spanner on the other end. The head on the other side of this is actually an 18. 18's not the commonest spanner size, so another reason to get a good set of metric spanners if you've got a Jag of this era. Just checking there's no pressure being applied by this spring damper strut to the suspension, but I can make it twitch, so we're all right. There we go. Apply a bit more penetrant, which does two things. Lubes the thread, but also cools the male part of the thread just a little. Sometimes when you're doing really tight stuff, you heat it up and it swells. And there we go. Smoke coming off it. And remember, that thread is probably really quite hot. Just struggling because I've got the wheels locked over and the caliper's a little bit in the way. Might have to just straighten the steering up a touch. And we're out. Now the bottom of our damper is free and the suspension has dropped just a little bit. And hopefully you can see why I'm wondering whether I really need to lose the wishbone, because I think that's going to drop down and I should get enough space to get this out. I might be wrong, that's fine. And now we can turn our attention to the top. So we got 3 bolts hidden by 3 plastic caps, and they're coming through from the strut mount, and they've got nuts on this end. Don't undo the middle nut. That releases the spring from the strut. You do not want to do that in this confines. You want to remove the whole thing. So leave the middle one well alone. What we're going to do is get them all just slackened. There we are, that's all loosened. And I'll be leaving one of them on, finger tight. There we go, get them out of the way. If your car doesn't have this, don't worry, that just means you've got a coupe, not a convertible. They are extra strengthening on convertibles. And all I'm doing now is I'm just holding the suspension strut from underneath so I can lift the weight off and finish that last nut. And then I'm going to go into the wheel arch. We're loose at the top, we're loose at the bottom. All that remains is to see if it can be manoeuvred out without removing any more parts. Let's give it a go. Right, we're completely clear at the top. Drop down into the space in front of the damper mounting. Wheel arch liner is restricting me just a little. Let's see if I can pop the bolts past it. Remember, this is just an experiment in how easy we can make this. Right, well, it appears at the moment, like I'll be able to get it out, but if I take the wheel arch liner out. So I've shown you how to remove that many times in many previous videos. So I'll get on with just doing that. Okay, folks, so with the wheel arch liner off, I've experimented in your absence and it won't quite do it. I mean, it's ever so close, but maneuvering the top, you're always going to collide with this seam. And if you try and maneuver the bottom, you're clamped by a damper bracket, or trying to come out this way, you end up pulling on your flexi hoses, your brake flexi hoses. So releasing either the top wishbone or this ball joint is in fact necessary. So I've done the experiment. We now know the fact rather than the folklore. So I'm going to remove the top wishbone. Before you ever remove your top wishbone bolt, make yourself a little 3-hook system, 3 bits of nails or anything you want in a bit of wood or whatever. And you can see I'm representing this big bolt going through the wishbone. It goes for a bush on both sides, B and B, and I've got 4 nails. That's because there might be spacers to the left of the bush, to the right of the bush, to the left of the bush, to the right of the bush. The position and number of those shims, spacers, washers is super critical to your car's setup, handling, caster angles, etc, etc. So as they come out, put them on the hooks. Seems like a silly thing, but you can get yourself into a right pickle. So we're looking at 24mm nuts and bolts. I've got my handy impact gun, so I know it's a bit of a deluxe tool, but I ain't going to strain just for effect. I've got it, and that's the end of it. Undone with no trouble. It is a thing, and I've had it happen, but that bolt I've just undone completely seizes in the subframe, and to get it out is an absolute pain. So it's a good idea to do some work on this now and again. So here's our first washer. As we can see, it's shaped. It fits this side of the bush. So he's going to go on to my little nail system next to the bush, top hat down. So that's the way I push it on to the end of the bolt. Don't think there's anything else there. Put a ring spanner on a bolt and then push, cock it over. Generally you can use it to drag the bolt out, generally. Because I'm close, I'm going to push it with this Allen key, just because that will also catch any washers or shims. Bolt out the first eye. Let's see what we can do. One washer, 2, 3, 3 washers, 1 dropped out on the other side. I'm pretty confident I know where that's come from. That went that way. 1, 2 washers on the other side, and then the big top hatty washer. On this side, just a top hatty washer. I think, unless anything else is stuck for I haven't noticed. Okay. Just letting the hub down to relax a little. Disconnect my ABS lead from its little clip. And there we are. I'm going to cut the cable ties all in the ABS line on. There we go. Right, well the only thing actually holding it up, because it looks like it's floating, the fact the spring is sitting on the subframe. So let me manoeuvre that out. Might be a bit shaky because heavy. And easy peasy. Out she comes. And that's it out. Oh, it's my washers, with the exception of that one that's still on the pin. Ooh, hoo, 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 hoo. You see what I was talking about with the bush? So let's get this over to the bench. Well, here we have the front strut assembly that I've removed on the bench next to the new replacement parts. Now, as I said, I'm replacing these for my own reasons, not because of failure. So if we look at the foam here, it's quite discoloured, it's very dark orange and has become, I'd say, coarse, but in many cases when you look in that area on people's dampers, they're crumbling, powdery, or I'll flick up a picture that one of our buddies, Gary Van Remotel, has sent in of some old Welsh mounts that, well, they're not that old. They did some miles on his car and look at the mess they're in. So these do degenerate. This is not a bad one, it has to be said. And if yours has got a little lip that's sticking up over this metal, that doesn't mean anything either. Look at a brand new one. Now this is under pressure, so we won't really know how much it's collapsed until I take the spring off, and then we can compare and put the spring on, and then we can compare. But it's certainly starting to go. You can see little, I don't know if you can or not, little splits, and it's tucking under, and it's starting to look like this would have become a necessity before too long. And that would have been age related, I think. Let's have a look at the dampers. Shock absorbers, struts, insert your own phrase. Okay, they do their job, they damp, but this bush is starting to fall to bits. What sort of thing we got going on here? This is on a spherical seat, but it's basically split and tore up. They haven't leaked, but they do look like they've been under the sea for a while. Which, to be fair, most cars on the roads in the UK look like that after about 2-3 years. On this side, we've got my new bits. I will put details in the description below the video. But the super executive summary is, I got my dampers, which are Bilstein's standard non-cat dampers. And this was the original brand, from British Parts. There's the number on them. 23116 672 6H000. I got my springs, which are uprated and lowered springs. Allegedly, and I say allegedly, not because of lack of trust, but it is hard to rate by height, to give approximately a 35mm drop. And I got these full set, front and rear, from Adamesh. So just go on the internet and search Adamesh, ADAMESH, one of my absolute favourite suppliers of Jaguar accessories. And then on there you can see Series 1 XK8 front. And I got my strut mounts, which consist of, this all comes as a pack, the top hat that sits in the spring, the rubber polyurethane probably donut that fits inside the top hat, and the strut mount itself, which encapsulates a piece of rubber holding onto this big central washer. That all came as a set, and I got a pair of fronts from British Parts again. On the springs front, you can get springs from many places. I'd say just get them from places you trust. I trust Adamesh. I'm not saying they're the cheapest. I'm not saying even they're the best, but they are trustworthy, good value for money, do exactly what it says. You can get advice, and many people purport to sell shorter or shortened uprated springs. If the springs don't have this taper here and here, then chances are they are not what they purport to be. They're actually cut down OE springs, and if you shorten a OE spring, it does become firmer and lower, but it's not the same as manufacturing one to do the job properly. Also, without these tapers, it won't seat correctly, and you're going to have a right game getting this back together and not kicking over the strut and wearing it out. So I recommend Adamesh stuff. You know what you're getting. So to finish our disassembly, we've got to get the spring off the strut and the strut top off. And the whole thing is being held in compression. This spring is squoze between this plate and this seat. And if you were to undo this nut, the whole thing would fly off and possibly take the wall out or kill you. Depends how much tension they're under. But you take no risks with road springs whatsoever. Now, I've put it in my voice. I want to point this out. This is very, very important. A, this is an old damper and it doesn't really matter. B, it's not in the jaws. If I turn the handle, you see it's loose. This is sitting in the throat of my vice and kind of hanging, just because it's a really convenient way of holding it safely. Do not squeeze this using a vice. There is a piston goes up and down in this. You destroy the seal if you clamp this, dent it, etc. So yeah, it looks like I've got it clamped. I have not. It is literally sat in the throat of my vice and can't come out the top because the jaws are slightly closed above it. The only specialist tool that you need to do this job really is a set of spring compressors. Get something that's decent. Don't buy the very, very cheapest spring compressors. Some of the ones you see have very thick hooks, which you think, oh, that's well impressive. They look strong, but the reality is you won't get that hook between the coils of your spring. So get something with a slender hook, but yet is strong. One hook is threaded, the other one is free to move, and at the opposite end, not only have I got a hexagonal drive, but I've got a 1/2-inch ratchet drive in there as well. So these are nice and easy and convenient to use, and always use a pair wherever possible. Again, I'll put a link in the description to either these or very similar ones if you want to get something similar. So I've got one of my hooks. That's the lowest it'll go on and go around both coils. Because this is a tapered spring and I've got double hooks, it will only go down so low. They're too small at the bottom, but it'll go on there. Let's put my other hook on and see how far up I can get that, and opposite it. Yeah. Yeah, and truth be known, I'm not going to be able to get these things far enough apart to do any good. So I need this to be loose. I don't need the bottom to be loose. So what I'm going to do is hook over one of my blades on the bottom cup. And tighten it there. There we go. So I've just put finger pressure on. Just going to pull this out a little further to give me space. I'm going to get my 1/2-inch ratchet, pop it in the end of there, give that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 movements. They're not any particular degrees, I just want to be reasonably even. Swing this round. So I've got the other one. Let's get them so I can get them both at the same time. One, two, this one's obviously slack now. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 movements, and then I'll go 10 more on this. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Over this side. So I'll show you, look, this is clearly got very little tension on now. Yeah, I'm able to make that twitch now. So I'm reasonably happy. These could go on expanding for quite some time, but I've got quite a lot of tension I can take off with this end bolt. And I think we're more or less there. Yeah, there's very little on that. Here's a safety tip my dad taught me. Love you, Dad, wherever you are. And I said, if you're using spring compressors, and it's one of the most dangerous things we do in the home garage, spring compressors. just wrap a towel or something else, a heavy sheet around them, because if they're going to let go, it's going to just take some of the power out. The actual bolts have been known to break on them when these used over time. The shafts do bend and flex and they fatigue through, so be very careful. Let's see if the sudden violent attack of an impact wrench will help us. Yes is the answer. Right, so I'm going to be super careful. So I've got a fair amount of thread there, but I don't want it to fly off. Let's just take it to a safe position. Still fully thread, fully in contact. There. That's probably as far as I dare take it. Very little pressure, but now I should be able to wind this up a little easier. Actually, off. Nylock nuts are brilliant, but they are irritating at times. There we go. And off she comes. You can see the rubber's just starting to completely crumble, fall away to nothing. Now out with the top hat, just jammed itself in. It's the same dense plastic as the replacement where I've got. And now, of course, we have to get our spring compressors back off this spring. So this is going to be long and boring, but at least it should get easier. Just put them on there and get my ratchet to start us off, and I'll use the impact gun on low impact to finish it off. And we're off. Okay. Now we want to keep the gaiter, and inside the gaiter is a bump stop. That bump stop, you can see, has really started to break down, and the spring should just fall off, but time has attached it to the base. So just give it a good wriggle. There we go. And there's our spring off. And the last thing we need to do is get this off the shock. It's the spring seat. Some people would call it the cup. You can buy them, but they're not cheap. So we'll be making use of this one. Hey, he's off. And there is a rubber seat of sorts on there, purchasable with difficulty. It's a little, like a dowel on there. That's where the tail of your spring goes up to. That'll get cleaned up and reassembled onto the new strut. So I think this video we're nearly done on, because I'm going to go and have a lie down. It's really hot. But you've seen how to disassemble a strut. You can also see how these decay over time. Mine's in serviceable condition compared to most, I've got to say, but it has really started to crumble at the edges, and that has affected ride height. So let's look at the new one. Quite some differences there. Let's take a couple of measurements for you guys. I know some of you love to have the details. Narrowest part on this is down to 13.8 mil. This be pretty universal. 17.4, 17.5, so very even. That can affect your ride height. The rubber in here can also break down. That will not affect your ride height. What that will do is allow the damper to move before it starts damping. And you get knocks and you get bouncy ride and noises if that bit's broken down. And again, that decays just as badly and quickly. So the springs, for your interest, this is the old spring, is 14.5 mil coil thickness. The Adamesh brand is 16 mil coil thickness. The overall height on the original spring is 37 centimeters. The height on the Adamesh spring is 30.5 centimeters. Boots are absolutely fine. Well, one out, 3 to go. So in our next video, I'll show you how to reassemble that, how to fit it correctly so that you hopefully don't cause a premature failure of your strut mount. And in a video after that, we will look at rear dampers and springs and doing a very similar operation. And then in our video after that, we'll take the car out on the road, do some height measurements, compare and contrast ride, handling, etc. These videos might not be concurrent one after the other. It just depends on what happens. I've got to crack on and make this happen because I'm hoping to have Purdey with me at Gaydon. They don't come out in real time, so we'll see. We'll see. See you all soon. If you're enjoying our channel, then don't forget to subscribe and click the little bell icon so you get notifications of new videos. And please give us a thumbs up or thumbs down, and you can share the videos. And below the video is always the area where you can comment and get involved with the chat.